Good morning, children. Hope you all are fine. Today, let's complete the chapter, okay, the last lesson. I hope you remember what was taught the other day. We have seen the class has already started. By whom? By the central character, M. Hamel, isn't it? So, he started the class, and the first hour was that of grammar. He taught them grammar. And when he asked question to Franz, we have seen what the reaction is, what happened over there. We have already seen it. And once the grammar class is over, what did he do? He switched on to writing session, isn't it? And there, what he did is, he gave a new copy to write that day, isn't it? Don't you remember? What was the thing that was given? It was France, Alsace, isn't it? That was the new copy that was circulated that day, and even we have come across an imagery there. That is all the students writing it together, starting from the first bench to the last bench. So how it felt? It felt as if flags of France is floating all over there in the class. It is where we have stopped the other day. I hope you remember. And even we have seen that no one is paying attention to anything else other than writing, isn't it? When the beetles flew in, no one paid any attention to that. And even the birds, the little birds that are there in the class, they even, they were scratching with their claws, and we feel as if they are even writing French. So like that, we have ended up with a comment by, or else a thought put forward by France, and the thought is this one: will they? And when the pigeons cooed at that time, the thought of France is being mentioned here. Will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? Like that, we have entered, isn't it? Hope you remember all these things. Now let's start with the next paragraph. Okay. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little school room. I hope you can imagine the situation. This man, remember, it's already told 40 years of service in this school. He has been staying there with the family, and he's taking care of the children who's coming to his class every year, isn't it? So it will be very difficult for him to move away, that too all on a sudden. He is not even prepared. If it's a retirement, naturally we'll easily get used to it, because we know that it's our age limit has crossed. We are supposed to retire from the service. Like that, already the man might have calculated it years before, isn't it? But this thing happened all on a sudden. He was forced to leave the school as well as the country. So very difficult for a man to adjust with the situation, isn't it? So what happens is that while I was writing, who is this I here? The I is none other than France. Okay, so France, what he did was, he looked up from his writing. He looked up from his writing and saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair, gazing first at one thing. Gazing means having a keen look at one thing that is there in the class, and then shifting his focus to another thing there in the class. It seems as if he's trying to take pictures, or else he's trying to create portraits of the things that is there in the class. Now the idea, each and everything, he's focusing on all those things and is trying to keep a picture in his mind. Why? Because he's surely going to miss all these things the next day. That is the reason why he is he's doing like this. He can't focus on one thing. He focused on one thing, then suddenly shifted his focus to another thing. Like that goes on. Why? Because it's very difficult for him to undergo the situation. He's really feeling sorry. He's feeling too sad that he's going to miss all these things the next day. Fancy means here what does it indicate? Just imagine. For 40 years he had been there in the same place, with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. See, Just imagine, for 40 years he has been doing the same thing. He is taking the class in the same place too. And the garden is there outside. You remember, he used to send his children to water the plants there in the garden, isn't it? So, the same place, he's occupying the same place, and even with the same garden there outside the window. How can he just miss all these things all on a sudden? It will be very difficult for him, isn't it? And his class in front of him, just like that. How can he simply miss all those things all on a sudden? It will be really difficult. Only the desks and benches had been worn smooth. Only the desks and benches that are there in the class, they have turned smooth because of the continuous use. Other than that, the atmosphere is still the same. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hook vine that he had planted himself twined above the windows to the roof. And the other changes is that the plants that he had planted once, it had grown up right now. Other than that, you can't go for any other changes there in this school. Maybe the trees, they might have, the trees that are planted by this man has grown up, and even the desk and the benches there in the class, it had turned smooth because of the continuous use by the students. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all. Poor man. To hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks. See how it might have broken the heart of this man. How much he might have been affected. You can very well imagine that. Especially, he is there in the class, that is the last class too. And what is the other noise that he can hear? Just above the class, it is the place where he resides. So in that particular room, his sister is packing all their belongings in a trunk. Why? Because they are supposed to leave the country that day. They are supposed to leave Alsace. Not the area. So that feeling of him, what happens is that he is really turning sad. After each moment, as each moment moves on, he is turning much more sad. For they must leave the country the next day. So this packing is being done by because they are supposed to leave the country that day. That was the order. As per the order, even the French master is supposed to move away from Alsace and Lorraine. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. But one thing is there, even though he was desperate, he had that courage to take class. All the different hours, he made it sure that he engaged all these hours. He showed or exhibited that courage. After the writing, we had a lesson in history. So remember, first hour grammar, second hour, what is the second hour that we have come across? Second hour, writing, isn't it? And now moving on to the third hour, it is the history hour. And then the babies, the little ones there in the class, they chanted. Chanted here means recited. There, ba, baby, boo, boo. The beginners, they are the beginners. So they were reciting the letters. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer. Remember, we have discussed about primer the other day. Primer, a book used by a beginner. In both hands, spell the letters with them. So old Hauser, who was sitting there in the back bench, I hope you remember the elders occupying the last bench. So old Hauser, what was he doing? He even joined the babies in chanting, ba baby bo boo. And he was having the primer in his hands, and he had kept it opened, and he was reciting along with them after looking into the primer. Remember an old man there in the class reciting along with the babies. Remember, it was a way to show the respect towards the master for the 40 years of service, and not only that, they even feel sorry for the neglect that they have done towards the education. Then you could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion, and it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. See? It was really something you have to have a look at. He was crying, he was reciting, and at the same time he was crying too. And we people first felt like laughing because an old man crying and chanting along with the babies. It was really something funny. But the situation made us feel like crying too. See, have a look at the situation. You can just imagine a man doing the last class over there, the village elders paying respect towards the man, and then the way in which the old man is reciting those lessons, all these things, you can understand. I hope you can very well understand the situation. That is the reason why the boy felt like laughing and at the same time crying too. Ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson. See, I very well, still now I remember the last lesson being taught there in the class. Remember, the sentence is usually used to appear in the board question paper. Ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson. Explain. Such a short answer question can also come, and even a long answer question can come up. If it is a short answer question, it happened to be the last class, then the answer is this: it is the last lesson handled by M. Hamel. Why? Because an order has come from Berlin that the next day onwards only German will be taught in schools of Alsace and Lorraine. So, being the last class, you could see that the village elders even came there to pay respect towards the master who had rendered 40 years of excellent service, and even they were feeling sorry for the what mistake that they had done during their childhood, ignoring education. These are the points that you have to write if it's a 2-mark question. Okay? If it's a long answer question, then you'll have to explain on what all things were going on in the class, how he handled the class, what all are the different periods that he took, that is like grammar, writing, history, all these things, and what he did in writing class. All these things in detail should be mentioned if it is a 6-mark question. Okay? Now moving on to the next paragraph. All at once the church clock struck 12. So we all were busy writing preparing the note, writing the notes and even listening to the class. So at that time, the clock struck 12. Then the Angelus. Angelus is actually a bell that is rung, especially when during the prayer time. You could see a bell will be rung, and after that, a prayer session will be there. And it is usually, this Angelus is there being done in Roman Catholic churches. Okay. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from drill sounded under our windows. So immediately after this Angelus, what we could listen is that at the same moment, not immediately after that, at the same moment, you could see that the Prussian soldiers, that trumpets from the Prussian soldiers who were returning back after their practice or parade, even that came so close. M. Hamel stood up, very pale, in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. I never saw him look so tall. Look so tall here refers to? See? I have never seen him standing up like that in that much of confidence. Got the idea? Huh? See? He wanted to control his emotions. Got the idea? Huh? So he's feeling respect that he was a master, a French master who had taught students for almost 40 years. That feeling was there in the way in which he stood over there. That is the reason why it is specially told that I never saw him so tall. He looks so tall. I haven't ever seen him standing in that much a confident manner before. He overcame his emotions. Earlier he was really desperate, isn't it? So he overcame all his emotions and he stood up over there with confidence. My friends, said he. But something choked him, something prevented him. He couldn't complete that sentence. You know, after all, the situation that prevails there. And remember, he's addressing his students as my friends. Even something to be noted, isn't it? See, my friends. After that, was he able to complete? No, he couldn't complete it at all. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could. Vive la France. Vive la France means long live France. So remember what happened was that he couldn't speak. So what he did is he took a chalk and turned to the blackboard and wrote with bearing on with all his might. That is, you can understand the situation of this man. So managing all those emotions and trying to gather all the strength. With that, he just wrote on the blackboard. What was the thing that he has written on the blackboard? Vive la France. Vive la France means long live France. Okay? So he entered up his class after propagating the idea of patriotism. Got the idea? Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall. And without a word, he made a gesture, an action to us with his hand. School is dismissed, you may go. So that was the last gesture from the part of the master, M. Hamel. Okay, so he turned towards the wall, and then what he did was he couldn't come up with his comment, so he just showed an action which intends that school is over, dismiss, the class is over, and you all may be back to your home. With that, the lesson is over. I hope the idea is clear for you. So let me just brief the thing that we have discussed today. So immediately after the writing section, what we have seen is, while the writing session was going on, this boy, Franz, at times was having a look at M. Hamel, and at that time the boy noticed that M. Hamel was concentrating on one thing after the other. It seems as if he's trying to keep all the things in the class as a portrait in his mind, isn't it? He was just focusing on all those things and was capturing the images and was keeping it aside in his mind. And then you are asked to imagine the situation. See, 40 years of a man there in this school. So how it will be? Changes happened, of course. Students will be coming 1 year after the other. New students will be joining the school. And other than that, the plants that he had planted there, it has grown up. And even the benches, the desk, everything gone smooth because of continuous use. Then, even the noise that is heard from the room there in which his sister is packing his belongings, all these things added to the depression that he's already having. And then you could see that immediately after the lesson of writing is over, what he did was he started a lesson in history. And then the babies, what happened after that? The babies, even they were reciting the letters all together. At that time, old Hauser to join the babies while they recited. And it is told how funny that situation is, and at the same time how sad it is too. And then he comments, he very well remember his last lesson too, isn't it? And at that time, even the clock struck 12 and it's time to wind up the session. So what happens is that the Prussian, I could see that at the same time the Prussian soldiers were coming back from the parade ground. And at that time he stood there and announced. He was about to start speak something, but he couldn't. Why? Because the emotions, it overcome, it actually couldn't, he couldn't prevent himself from controlling his emotions, and because of that reason, something choked him, and because of that reason, he couldn't complete his comment. So what he did was, he turned towards the board and wrote in big letters, Vive la France, long live France. And then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall and showed a gesture as if for the students to inform them that school is dismissed and you may leave. Like that, he showed a gesture. That is all the last lesson is about. The last lesson, do you think, don't you feel that the title is also really important? So you may be asked that question, significance of the title, the last lesson. The same points that I have told regarding the statement, how well I remember at that last lesson. You can use the same points for writing that question too. Remember a very important question that is, comment on the significance of the title, the last lesson. Let me just give you the points once again. The first point is that, of course, it is the last lesson taken by or else going to be handled by M. Hamel. Why is it so? A man having 40 years of experience is being asked to leave the campus because of an order that came from Berlin. The order says that from the next day onwards, the schools of Alsace and Lorraine should propagate German language rather than French language. So that is the reason why he is dealing with the last lesson. And on that particular day, since it is the last lesson, we could notice that this man patiently explains everything to the student and was not scolding anyone, was trying to give all the things that he knew. Isn't it? So we have come across those things. And then, of course, in the last lesson, the patriotic spirit that he wanted to inject in the mind of the people there in the class. Even that plays a very important role. Since it is the last lesson only, he did so. Isn't it? It is not that he really don't want to propagate the idea, but because the situation demands, he thought that it's better, before I leave, let me, in one way or the other, try to propagate the idea of patriotism in the minds of the young children who was there in the class. Okay? So that's all with the last lesson. Let me now move on to the next question. I'll help you with another question. Okay, the next question that I want you to listen is the character sketch of the person, M. Hamel. It's really important to know the character sketch of M. Hamel. It's a very, very important question. It has been asked a different number of times. Okay? So the very first point, please note the points in your notebook. You can elaborate on it later. The first point that you should include for this man is he is a devoted teacher. Isn't it? Don't you feel so? A very devoted man towards his profession. So that is the first point why you have to include while you write the character trait of this man, a very devoted person. And how come he showed his devotion is that even though he is asked to leave the school, what he did was, on the last day, he tried to propagate his maximum to his students. So that shows how much devoted he is. Isn't it? Don't you feel so? That is, he is given in the writing session, a new paper or else a new writing session was provided to them, in which France Alsace was written. Isn't it? He could have actually skipped that thing and he could have simply talked to the students and might have left. But he didn't do so. So that shows how much devoted that man is. So that is the first point that you have to include while you talk about M. Hamel. Okay? Now, the next point is he is a true patriot. Isn't it? That is the reason why he continuously asks the children to stick on to your language. I hope you remember that part where he explains on the French language. It's the most beautiful, the most clearest, and the most logical language there in the world. And he is even requesting them to tightly hold on to their language. Why? Because whenever you are enslaved, right now that's the situation, isn't it? They have right now come under the control of Germans. They are right now slaves, isn't it? So whenever you are enslaved, if you tightly hold on to your language, at that time, it is as if you are having the key of the prison in which you are enslaved. I hope you remember that particular sentence as such, isn't it? So that really shows how patriot he is. Not only that, the writing session that he has provided even adds to this particular point that he is a true patriot, isn't it? And then the next point that you can mention is highly disciplined, isn't it? Remember, he was always having a ruler in his hands, isn't it? He always used to keep it in his hands, and the boy was even afraid of the ruler that was used by this man. So it seems as if this man really wants discipline in his class. That is the reason why this point should be included. The continuous use of ruler and how strict he is, and he's really afraid. France is really afraid that he hasn't prepared participles well. So all these things suggest that this man is a very disciplined fellow, isn't it? Then, the next point. He turns upset, and because of that, he even changes his behavior too, isn't it? When is he turning upset? He turns upset when he came to know that that's going to be his last class. He couldn't give all that he had to his students, isn't it? There he turned upset. And because of that, he changes his behavior. And he changes in the behavior. In which point can you mention that he changes his behavior? He changes his behavior is clearly mentioned when we could see that part where he questions Franz, isn't it? He questions Franz, and Franz is not ready with the answer to. Usually, what happens is that he scolds his children, but that particular day he didn't do so. He changed his attitude or behavior. Why? Because he was that much upset. He was so calm, and he blamed himself for the mistake that he had done. Not only himself, even the parents. He was never ready to blame his children. So he changed his demeanor at that time. Isn't it? Don't you feel so? So that is yet another point that should be written. Okay? Now, the next point that you can mention about him. The next point is emotionally attached. Emotionally attached to both the students as well as the school, isn't it? Towards the end of the chapter, you could note. See, he got emotionally attached to the school. Why? I mean, it is really clear when you could see that this man, while all the children were writing, he was focusing on each and everything that is there in the class. Why? Because he's going to miss it from the very next moment, very next day onwards. As soon as the school closes that day, he's surely going to miss all these things. So that very well shows how emotionally attached he is towards his school. That is the next point that you are supposed to write. Then, and even emotionally attached to the students. In that point, you can even write that because since he was too much emotional, he couldn't complete his speech. Remember the last part of the lesson, I, but something chalked. He couldn't complete that sentence. So that shows how he turned out to be too emotional. Then, I hope we have mentioned the point patriot. Let me check it again. A true patriot. Okay, that point is also mentioned. So these are the different points that you have to answer. You have to elaborate on it. Okay, if a character sketch is asked, naturally it will be a 6-mark question. So you can mention him as a very devoted teacher who had rendered 40 years of excellent service in this school, and then you can call him even as a true patriot. Then highly disciplined person. Then he immediately turns out to be upset when he came across the order from Berlin, and thereby he changes his character or behavior. Then emotionally attached not only to the students but also to the school, and is trying to give his best. And if you want, you can even include one more point that he never, already we have mentioned it in one another context, but still maybe when that thing it can also be mentioned, that is, never blames his students. Never blames his students. So even this point can also be included. Okay, children? So character sketch, and then the other one, in appropriateness of the title, the last lesson. The title. These are the two important questions that I want you to write in your notebook along with the short answer questions that I have given you. And I hope you might have surely gone through the extra question answers that I have provided to you. So if you haven't yet, kindly go through it today. Read through all, I think more than 40 questions are there. So 40 questions along with its answers are there. Just kindly go through it one by one. And if you have any confusions or queries, please do ask. Okay? Please, either personally you can send a message or else in the group itself. I'll be surely there to help you out in clearing your doubts. And next week, I plan to show you a PowerPoint presentation based on this chapter. And maybe we'll start with another chapter too, Deep Water, from the same text, Flamingo. Okay? Deep Water. So make it sure that you learn this lesson during this weekend itself. I'll announce an exam for you. The next week I'll be telling you the date, or else maybe this weekend itself I'll inform it to you or through the WhatsApp account that we have. Okay, children, let's wind up the session for today. Thank you for your patient listening. Have a wonderful weekend ahead.